Okay, so once you've got your SD card from your field recorder into your computer, you're going to want to look to analyze that. So I'm just doing this on a Mac, and I'm going to run through how I sort of go through things in Audacity, which is a free piece of software. There's loads of instructions on how to download Audacity available freely online. So I'm not actually going to focus on that, but I'll show how to kind of set up some of the preferences and the ways of using it to analyze NocMig sounds, or the way I do it anyway. So to start with, I'm just going to use some example data that I recorded a few nights ago. So normally this would just be pulling up whatever you've got from your external hard drive, but in this case I am just going to drag and drop a file into Audacity that I recorded a couple of nights ago. So I'm doing that actually on a second screen. You can't see it, but it's loading up now. And this warning will come up asking you whether you want to make a copy first. It's kind of useful if you can archive all your recordings first, like the whole raw files, but that does use up a lot of capacity if you're recording in WAV. So it depends if you've got an external hard drive really to put stuff onto. Otherwise, you can just analyze things directly on the SD card and do your analysis that way, and then make cuts of any particular species that you find as new files, which saves on a lot of disk space. In general, like a single night of recording is about 6 to 8 gigabytes, so that pretty quickly starts to use up like hard drive space and stuff like that. So it's something to be mindful of in terms of how you want to approach this, but Audacity gives you the option of how you want to bring things in. So when this lands and you've opened Audacity for the first time, if you don't have your preferences preset, it may not look exactly like this. So I'm going to kind of just go through and explain how to set the preferences up a little bit. So when you first import something, I think it should just be drag and drop on the PC as well. But you'll probably then, the next thing you'll want to do is go through all these preferences. There's a really useful document that's linked on Xenocanto by Volkner Arnold, and he's kind of gone through these preferences. So I'll link that in the description to this video, and it should give a kind of guide. But basically the key things are some of the interfaces and some of the spectrograph preferences, because the default, I think, for Audacity is to display like a sound wave. So there's a few different things that you want to do. Firstly, playback. A lot of these things are variable within the actual configuration, so you can zoom in and out. So it doesn't necessarily matter too much about these, but the length of preview, probably about 15 seconds, is good. A lot of these things, the majority you don't necessarily want to change, but it's just good to be mindful that these options exist to be able to change them. 48 kilohertz is the kind of default sampling rate for conventional field recorders. Anything higher than that, like if you're trying to do ultrasonic stuff or bats, things like that with special microphones, you'll need much higher sampling rates. But that's kind of, for NocMig, I think 48K is fine. Interface just is the kind of language options. Then tracks needs to be set to spectrogram rather than waveform. Some people do prefer the log version, apparently, but I've always found that a straight spectrogram's good. And then the important one is spectrograms, and to actually customize the 40A fast transform window, which is basically the way that you are graphically interpreting the sound on the screen. So there's a minimum and maximum display. I leave that as 0 to 10 to begin with, but again, you can kind of zoom in and out once you're actually analysing a particular recording. Gain 15 is recommended, 80 is kind of okay. And then this needs to be Gaussian or Blackman-Harris. I use this Gaussian 4.5A. I think there are ways to customize things so that they're not in grayscale somewhere on here as well. So if you prefer things in color, then there should be an option somewhere through here to make the interface in color rather than this grayscale. But I'm going to leave it customized for this grayscale set of preferences. But the point is basically the first time you load this up, you'll want to kind of play around with this and make sure you use a recording where you've actually already got some bird sound, you know there's birds there, maybe do like a test recording at dawn or something, and then you can sort of customize things in such a way that best suits you for like a visual interpretation of what you're hearing on the recording. So because I recorded just from the left channel of my H4n, I've only got a left channel recording here. So what I'm going to want to do with this one is split it. You might find that if you've recorded in stereo, like through the auxiliary cable, you'll actually have two versions of this. Or if the default from most handheld recorders is that there are two microphones and you'll have two different channels, like a left and right. It doesn't really, I mean, I've never found, unless something's like very faint in a particular direction, I don't think you're going to miss a lot by just deleting a particular channel. So I've always just used this one channel approach, and if you've got an external mic, it's likely to only record through one channel anyway. So I split the channels, delete the empty one, and then switch this to mono. Now this is a whole, this is the maximum recording that an H4n will do, which is about 122 minutes, 3 hours and 22 minutes. So there's not much that you can actually interpret from this as it is, but if we zoom in, oops, that's zooming out. There we go. We start to zoom in. Then what you actually want in terms of your, I find in terms of temporal window, it's kind of dependent on how much stuff's calling and how quickly actually, like how much time you've got to go through the previous night's recordings. So at the top here, you've got the number of seconds on this particular recording, somewhere in the range of like 20 seconds to a minute. I can't deal with like more than a minute's worth on the screen at the same time. And as I say, like if you're trying to do stuff for like diurnal recordings and pick out particular species within that, I would do shorter time periods. If it's the middle of a very quiet night, you might find that you can go through recordings more quickly the next morning by having a longer temporal period on the screen at any given time. So I'm just going to kind of start going through these. One thing, I'm sure anyone who's tried this before will realise that the majority of sounds that you actually hear are actually clicks and squeaks and various sort of things of people's heating systems firing up and turning off, and you know, bird calls don't make up the majority of the sounds that you're going to hear. So it's not necessarily worth investigating every single sound, and you'll gradually get your eye in for things that are mechanical sounds and like anthropogenic sounds versus biophonic sounds and bird calls and things like that. So like you can probably hear the hiss of this and just some like quiet clicks. And typically these mechanical clicks go across the whole frequency range, and they're very much like straight lines across the recording, so you can normally eliminate those quite quickly. So I then just start to click through. If it's a noisy night, one thing to do potentially is to apply filters to the entire recording, which is useful for if you've got like a lot of traffic noise, or if there's like a wind blowing and you're getting a lot of low frequencies being picked up on the mic as the wind's catching the recorder. I'm not going to do this right now, but you'll see how I do it later on when I'm cleaning bird recordings, and it's the same process. It just involves applying that filter to the whole 3 hours rather than to small segments, which is what I'm going to do in this sort of demo. So I'm just clicking through now, and you can see that we're up to 56 seconds. I've just got the mouse over here and just clicking through each time. And basically I'm looking for anything out of the ordinary. We can see a little something here, but to be honest, I can't even hear anything. So a lot of those sort of squeaks and clicks are things that you just sort of have to let go. And you'll kind of get into the habit of moving through faster and faster. Now over here does look like there is something, so maybe we can actually hear what that is. And through my speakers at the minute, because I'm playing this so that it's audible as I'm re-recording it on the video capture, I can barely hear anything. But it does look like there's something there, so maybe we can kind of boost it and figure out what it is. On headphones, when I actually went through this first time, I knew straight away what those were upon hearing them. So it's worth kind of just getting your eye in for something like that. You can see a couple of fundamentals here and a low one there, so there's something going on. So what you can do then is just copy the section where there's actually something interesting happening. Gives you a much smaller recording to have to deal with, and I just tend to open up a new file and dump it in. I mean, everyone might, there's lots of different people doing this, and everyone might have their own sort of techniques, because everyone's kind of developing it in isolation, and I don't think there's exactly been a forum or any sets of tutorials, so I'm sure other options apply, but this is just how I do it. So I'm going to Control-C that, and then, yeah, so there we go. So that's just pasted across about 7 seconds of recording into a new file, and we can expand that temporally a little bit, and you just see something going on there. So then there's this big line of sort of distance traffic noise. I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm also going to try and get rid of some of the just general background noise. So first thing to do with that is some effect stuff. So I often find that for some reason around this sort of 600 to 900 kilohertz, there is this band of distant traffic noise. So I'm going to put 750 as a frequency and just do a notch filter, which will try and just kind of knock out anything that's at that particular frequency, which because our recordings on these spectrographs are above that, hopefully they should be completely unaffected. And then I don't quite know how this Q value works, but basically the bigger you make it, the smaller you make it, the wider the area is that is taken out by the notch filter. So I think, I don't quite know why that is, but there's some roll off as well between the frequencies in the middle are taken out more than the frequencies slightly further away, and normally it's a band of about 500 kilohertz that's affected. So I'm going to put 0.8 this time, so I'm going to take quite a lot of that out. If I put 1, it would actually be a much narrower notch, so that'll then apply that to the whole recording. Well, it should have done. That's weird. Okay, I'm going to highlight it to do it first. Oh, there we go. Okay, so you can see now that there's this pale line where that's taken those out. And then I'm going to do a general noise reduction. So in order to do that, you need a sample of background noise of the stuff that you want to get rid of, basically. So when you're preparing and pulling out a particular bird sound from your main recording, you're going to want to pull out a big enough sample that you can find some background noise associated with it. That's quite difficult if it's like a dawn recording and everything's singing at the same time. So you often have to pull out maybe a minute or so in order to be able to isolate the noise and then remove it from the recording. But then we just go to noise removal, and there's quite a lot of settings in this. This is how I have it set up currently, and that's, I think, just after a fairly long time playing around with these values. In the Volkner PDF, he's got some other recommendations of slightly different values to these, but this is what works for me. If you want to play around and sort of see what the trade-offs are in terms of potentially reducing the quality of the actual call you've got versus how much noise is reduced in the background, it might be worth playing around with these values. So I don't tend to put this any higher than I wouldn't put it any higher than 20 at the absolute maximum, because otherwise it will really start to affect the quality of the calls that are in there. So that gives you that kind of quality of sounding like you're in a spacesuit off in the distance sort of thing. All the edges of the information are affected, and the call quality gets completely reduced. So 12 is what I start with, and I try not to go much above that really. 20 at the absolute max. So then we do get noise profile, and what that's done is taken this segment of a few seconds to assess what the actual noise profile is, and then if I click off it, I can remove that profile of noise from the whole recording. So now I do go back to noise removal and then just click OK. Okay, so you can see that the background got a little bit paler there, but it's also a little bit kind of hazier. There's a bit more sort of static, but those two calls stand out a little bit better. And then we're going to amplify to kind of compensate for that, and I'm going to amplify by 18. You might need to allow clipping sometimes if it's a loud recording. It just means that it'll clip the tops of the highest signals. Okay, and then we can sort of start to see a little bit better these two recordings. In fact, what I'm going to do is, I don't feel like I need any of these lower frequencies. So I'm going to do a high pass filter, which will pass over the top and just leave the stuff that's high up and take out all the lower stuff. So I'm going to cut off at 1000 kilohertz and take out 12 decibels of everything that's below that. And there we go. So you can see that there's like a real roll-off in this, so it doesn't apply it as much to these higher frequencies, around 1000, as it does to the very lowest ones. It's really useful on windy nights because a lot of the lowest frequencies will be wind stuff. And you may now be able to hear that. I'm going to amplify it a little bit more and be a bit more aggressive. Put it up another 10. Okay, and then this is the zoom in and out. Really useful to be able to move in and out like that. I'm actually going to do a bit more noise removal. So we've already got the noise profile from last time, but I'm going to take out another 8 and push it all the way to 20. Oh, I need a new noise profile because I have increased the volume since then. So the profile of the noise here is very different than it was before I amplified it all. Okay. Right, so it should be possible now, hopefully, to hear something. So if you hear that last one, that is a sandwich tern flying overhead. And so, just to confirm that, this is what I tend to do. If we just go to Xenocanto, we should be able to find something that's vaguely comparable. Okay, and the one thing that's useful in Xenocanto when you're looking for a type of recording that's similar to something you've heard is to go to this sonograms tab, and you can, I mean, the resolution isn't great because they're sort of just thumbnails, but it often makes for a quicker way of pulling up sounds that are similar to what you think you've heard, because a lot of these things, you know, little grebes have quite a varied repertoire of sounds that they can make flying over overnight, so it's useful to be able to go through things like this. Okay, so this looks like roughly what we've heard. Okay, so it's that same classic call of sandwich tern. So, you know, you can compare it directly like that. If I minimise this window, but they're not really on the same scales. You know, it's not that easy to get the direct comparison, right? So, one thing that's useful to do sometimes, if you're really, you know, trying to drill down into something, is, if I can find that same recording again, just lost track of it now. There we go. I am going to actually save this, download it, and then I want to open it in the Finder. Okay. There it is an MP3. And I'm going to go back to Audacity, open a new file, and dump it straight in there. So this will give you it with exactly the same settings and parameters that you're looking at your own recording. And okay, this one's been recorded. This guy obviously recorded using a dual microphone with 2 mics, so we can split that. We only need one of them, and delete one of the channels. And then I'm just going to take a little sample of like 1 or 2 of these calls. In fact, I'll just take 4 and copy this, and I'm just going to paste it directly into my own recording. Okay, so zoom in a bit more. Take out. You can actually just highlight areas and just delete them completely, and it will relieve a load of dead sound. So there we go. Right. So what you can see is, this is my recording from the other night, and this is a much cleaner, nicer Xenocanto recording. And obviously this is a distant bird flying over at night on the left, and this is a really nice, clean recording. But you can see this, the kind of trilled part of the call, that really raspy sound at the start, and then the upslurred rip. And you know, even though this is very faint off in the distance, quite poorly resolved on this spectrograph, you can see those characteristics of the strongest part of the core. Now, these upper frequencies are actually missing because it's not traveled well enough over whatever distance the bird was. It obviously wasn't super close, but you can still see that those two patterns really match up, and you can listen and you can hear it as well, right? So this, I think, is something else it's calling, or at least a different type of sandwich tone call. But yeah, that's kind of how I go through and compare things when they're similar, but all I've got is a few fundamentals low down, and sort of helps to compare to different types of calls. It allows you to, I think, assess and fully identify species which you might not otherwise be able to do. With this sandwich tone, I pretty much knew what it was by ear the first time I heard it, especially with earphones in. But for a few things, it's good to kind of like go through and work through these things, compare them to species that you suspect they might be. And it's only through doing that like a whole bunch of times and going through especially a lot of shorebird calls that it's really possible to start getting a feel for what species are flying over at night. Okay, so I'm going to carry on going through for a little bit. So we can get rid of this, go back to the original recording. I really hope that this has been recording the whole time and I haven't made a video of nothing. Okay, so we go back to our original. And I basically just sort of click through as fast as I can. And you see something happened there. Well, as fast as I can manage anyway. You often sort of feel half glimpse something and you have to go back and look at it. Nothing that I would want to put a name to. I mean, that's the other thing, is that it's really important to know. Tim Jones was saying this on Twitter, and it's a really critical thing with this NocMig stuff, is that it's really important to know what to let go of as well. You could potentially spend hours and hours trying to pin down the tiniest little click or clip, and it may be that it was a bird, it may be that it was something really good that would have been new for the garden, but even if you sometimes the vocalizations that you record in this context are so far removed from like a good daytime recording that even if you are able to sort of suspect something, you're not ever going to be able to identify it with any confidence. So it's not really worth doing it to yourself. It just gets incredibly frustrating. So one piece of advice would be to just focus on things that are fairly clear in the recordings. Try not to get hung up on tiny little sips and clicks, because otherwise A, it'll just take an inordinate amount of time, and B, you'll find it incredibly frustrating. So I just click through as fast as I can, and normally, I think when I was first doing this, I was drilling down into a lot of things on Xenocanto. It would take me an hour or two to go through a night time's recordings. Now I can probably do that in about 10 or 20 minutes, because I'm just clicking through almost as fast as I can. My computers are running a bit slower because I'm recording this as a video at the same time, so it's not quite as effective as it would be otherwise, but hopefully it gives you the idea. And this is, I'm sure, what everyone else finds, is that the majority of what you're seeing and what you're looking through is just grey nothingness on the spectrograph. So this is run a bit further, but I did just spot something a couple of seconds ago that looked like it was a vocalization. There we go. I've gone past it again. So that might be doable. I don't think that's going to be worth the effort, to be honest. We can give it a go and see if it pulls out as anything. So set the new file. I mean, the other thing is that there is a big difference between doing this in a video like this, where I'm listening on the computer speakers, and the recording that you're hearing is played through my computer speakers, re-recorded by my computer microphone, versus listening to the raw thing directly on headphones, which will come across much crisper and clearer. So we'll run the same notch filter we did before. Got a nice long bit to do some noise removal, profile. I'm going to knock off the highlight because you've got to then apply it to the whole recording. 15. And then maybe amplify it. It's really quiet, this. Okay. I mean, could be water rail. It's only one call, so something like that I would just generally leave. I mean, I know it's frustrating, but you've got to know when to quit with NocMig. That's the thing. So I'll just go through, see if I can find anything else. Oh, so the other sort of aspect of this is that it's really worth being mindful of when you're starting to run into dawn. Maybe I can find an example of that. So I'll try and load up another recording. And I'm actually going to pause this one and maybe start that as a separate recording. So if you're going to do this direct from your SD card, you just need to find the relevant files on whatever card you just had in your field recorder, and see 3 files that are from earlier this morning, finished at 8:15 AM, and just drag and drop them into Audacity. I'm actually going to take the second one because I kind of want to show you what it's like when you start running up towards dawn. So that's another sort of challenge to have to deal with when you're kind of isolating things that are flying over. So hopefully this should be the file that runs into dawn, and that should be immediately apparent on the sonogram. Yeah. So this is the second half of the night, recorded last night. I've not been through this at all, but you can see immediately on this file that as we get into the sort of last 20 minutes of the recording, there's a lot more going on, and this is actually all the bird song around dawn. So just as a quick and split this track, delete that one, switch it to a mono, and zoom in. So the bit that it's fairly easy to isolate recordings in the middle of the night when there's not too much going on, although it looks like it kind of got a bit windier last night. But the real challenge is knowing kind of when to stop at dawn. And I've seen a few people posting kind of ID queries, and a lot of the time, or a sort of fairly regular issue that people seem to run up against in terms of ID queries is that they're actually hearing the very first sort of notes of song thrushes and blackbirds at dawn. So I thought I'd just kind of try and give a little bit of insight into knowing where you're talking about nocturnal flyovers and where you start to see the first songs of dawn. So I've gone a bit too far at the moment. Okay. So you can see that there was actually a lot more traffic noise later in the night. So I'm going to actually run a high-pass filter over the whole of this recording. I'll have to do a bit of a fast forward on this one. See, that's going to take 2 or 3 minutes. In fact, I'm going to cancel that and put it a bit higher first, because I want to take out all this stuff low down. So let's get rid of the first 1600 and do it. Okay, so once that's finished, you'll see that it's taken out a whole lower end of the frequency range, and this sort of all appears quite a lot cleaner. It's worth just making sure that you've got the right sort of temporal window on screen in terms of how many, what sort of time period you're looking at any one time, and then you can start going back through again. Let's zoom in a little bit more. And a little something there, but probably too distant to do anything with. And you'll notice that there seems to be something now at like fairly regular intervals, but virtually inaudible. And as you move forward, you start to see this is the area that you really have to be wary about when you're looking for nocturnal calls, because as we carry on, that could be something different. I'll come back to that. But you'll see this is about once every 10 seconds. There's kind of a group of calls here, and then a group of notes here, but they're ultra far away. And if we had the ability, I can't really play this very clearly because it's not on the earphones, but that's probably a very distant blackbird that's singing pre-dawn. You can start to pick up these, the very first singers of dawn is really a thing to like watch out for, because you can spend all your time looking out for these things until the first sort of clear song, which here looks maybe a dunnock. Yeah, I mean, you still can't hear it, but it's very, with headphones that would be viable. But it's very clear on the sonogram. But this is not something flying over. This is a resident bird that started to sing. And you'll just find that, like, in the very early hours, the first few singers are really like a thing to watch out for, and don't try and like overinterpret them as things that are flying over nocturnally. We've got something else here. Yeah, a blackbird alarm call. So, yeah, and then robins and blackbirds. And the way you can kind of start to tell that is that within, it's that kind of half-hour period of the first twilight of dawn, and you just get a few things starting to chime up before they really start singing. But if you go forward on the recording, then you'll see that, you know, within 30 minutes of that happening, you've actually got things singing more fully. So that's one clue. And the other is that you get these nice sort of 5 to 10 second intervals between these little song periods, even when they're really distant. So you can see here that robins and blackbirds are starting to get going. Yeah, that's a distant robin. And then as this gets bolder and more things start to sing, you'll start to pick out these high notes. And I think once Robin's doing these high notes and singing close enough for you to pick that up on the sonogram, it's probably, well, it's certainly going to be a lot more work to go through and pull out anything flying over at dawn. So it really depends how much time you've got. I mean, you know, some of the best stuff potentially does fly over when it's already got light, but you know, some of the diurnal migrants, if you're ever going to get a flyover Serin, it's going to be at this time. But pulling it out from the sort of cacophony of the dawn chorus, you almost have to listen to it in real time to be able to do that. So, yeah, if anyone's up for that challenge, then they're very welcome to try. It's not something I usually ever go at. Right, so I think that's basically everything. I mean, this is not to say that I've got any unique expertise in this, or that you know, I'm any kind of real authority on it. It's just to sort of give some insights, because I know it's a really steep learning curve, and I just thought it'd be useful to kind of share like the setup that I use and some of the ways that you can streamline and make your analysis a little bit quicker. So yeah, hope that's helpful to a few people, and thanks for watching.